Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to Collective. We are actually 5 minutes early. You're not seeing things. I am one of your hosts, Ben. If you're not familiar, let me. Oh, see, that's why we test in advance. We are actually 5 minutes early. There you are. So we're gonna do a little opening song, and then we'll get into our liturgy right at 5. Hey Jim, hey Jay, Melanie, Marilyn, Bill.
Try your best, but you don't succeed. You get what you want, but not what you need. You feel so tired, but you can't sleep. You're stuck in reverse. Come streaming down your face. You lose something you can't replace. You love someone but it goes to waste. Could it be worse? Lights will guide you home and ignite your bones. I will try to fix you. High up above or down below, when you're too in love to let it go. If you never try, you'll never know just what you're worth. Lights will guide you home and ignite your bones. I will try to fix you. Tears stream down your face when you lose something you cannot replace. Tears stream down your face, and I tears stream down your face. I promise you I will learn from the mistakes. Tears stream down your face, and lights will guide you home and ignite your bones. I will try to fix you.
4:59 on the nose.
you go.
That's right. Welcome, Fred. How are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing great. Hey guys, it's 5 p.m. on the nose. That means it's time for, it's actually not, now it's 5 p.m. on the nose, according to Steve Jobs and Apple in Cupertino, California. Speaking of California, Pete Rollins, welcome. Pete is joining with us from LA. It looks like we've got people from all over. Hey, John Schulteis up in New York, Dottie from up in New Hampshire. We got people from all over. Debbie from New Smyrna Beach. I'm sure there are a bunch of other folks on from all over the world. Whether you're here for your love for Collective or your love for Peter Rollins, for us tonight, it's all the same love. So welcome. We're really, really glad you're here. If you missed it, my name is Ben Collins. Really happy to be a host tonight. With me is Fred. We're here for some music, maybe a little comic relief. If you guys want to know more about what's going on with Collective, you should get connected. There's a whole page on our website called Get Connected. So go to wearecollectivechurch.com. If you're online, we would love it if you chat with us in the Facebook chat. Like I said, there's already a bunch of people in there. It's great to see all of you guys. We got regulars. Hopefully we'll have a handful of other folks. We will be going to a Zoom after this. Please forgive me. I know there are people who we sent out advertisements that we would send you stuff for the Zoom. Bear with us. We lost our director of operations who's run the show for the last 7 years about a month ago. So the fact that we've even got a Peter Rollins event is a miracle. Freddie can attest to that. So we are going to have a liturgy tonight just chock full of Pete Rollins, and then we are going to have Pete Rollins live on a Zoom after. I promise all of you that want to be a part of it will get to be a part of it. So stand with us just for a moment and take a deep breath. We're going to get through this. So just hang in there, and we'll get into it in just a second. This week, if you're a part of Collective's community here, just the regular stuff. Tomorrow night we will have yoga as usual. Tuesday we will have our sermon planning and crowdsourcing group at 4 p.m. if you want to be a part of that. And then Thursday, 5:30, Collective Cares. Those are all going to be Zoom-based for right now. We're not doing any hybrid in-person events yet, but we're looking at it. Why don't you guys take just a second and check out our community statement. That'll tell you a little bit more of what we're about for those of you who are joining us for the first time, and those of you who are already a part of the community. Some good memories and happy faces. So check out who we are. Here's our community statement.
We value highly the metaphor of journey.
We're different people from different places and backgrounds.
Representing a multi-generational community, and we travel different paths.
So we agree not to make assumptions about the person across from us.
Next to us.
Or in conversation with us.
We challenge ourselves to be sensitive.
Knowing this community includes a diverse group of people.
From lifelong followers of Jesus
to people who are just now open to the idea that God might exist.
We strive to avoid offense.
Ask good questions.
articulate and explain our responses.
We don't assume fluency in the Bible,
spirituality, or church language.
Because we believe the message of Jesus is not for Christianity, but for humanity.
So we do everything in the spirit of love and grace.
We do everything in the spirit of love and grace.
In the spirit of love and grace.
Everything in the spirit of love
and grace.
So we do everything in the spirit of love and grace.
All right, guys. Thanks for everybody who contributed to that awesome community statement, and for everyone who makes up that community now. Thanks again for joining us. We are going to let me just tell you a little bit. I think if you're like me, I work better with sort of a plan if I know what's coming, and that also helps me to trust, and trust helps me to surrender so that I can let things in. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to sit silently and meditate for about 3 minutes, and then there's going to be an intro video from Pete, followed immediately by Pete doing the first reading. So that's quite a bit of content. So I want to invite you to like start from a place of peace here. And we're talking tonight about knowing and not knowing. So the meditation tonight is going to be surrendering knowing. And I want to invite you to just take one more step or one more breath and not worry about the destination of knowledge, but just allow yourself to be open to the journey. If you're participating with the drone footage, it'll be some awesome railroad tracks, so feel free to follow that journey. Just slowly breathe. If you want to shut off the sound and shut your eyes, just sit silently, but we're going to sort of cleanse our spiritual palate here for a few minutes before we get into the content tonight, and then Pete will do an intro to the series, followed immediately by the first reading, and then we'll sort of cleanse our palate with some music and then dive into the main talk. Here we go. Let's sit silently together for about 3 minutes and prepare ourselves by surrendering our need for knowledge and just opening ourselves to this experience. Let's sit together. All right, so I just want to say a quick word of introduction to Pete for those of you who may not know him. Obviously, many of you guys are probably tuned in because Pete is on tonight. And for those of you that aren't, Pete is a philosopher and a theologian. I call him Pete, Dr. Peter Rollins. He's got advanced degrees and things that I can't. I think post-structural theory and some other really, really cool stuff. But Pete is a theologian and a philosopher, and the way that that manifests primarily is writing books, is speaking, and I would say even more specifically telling really good stories. He's a great storyteller. He's become a really good friend of mine. I trust him with my life. I trust him with my kids. He's not just a figure to us at Collective anymore. We really feel like he's a part of our community, and he's been incredibly supportive. Because he's not just about the theory. We've learned, and he's an academic. He has the chops to do all that work, but he also has been a part of, and especially a part of supporting communities of practice that aren't just thinking about this kind of theology, but who are figuring out how in the world do we live this together, especially in the dumpster fire of the world that is. So what we're going to do is cut to Pete right now. He's going to intro this whole series for us with just a few minutes, and then he's going to dive right into our first reading, which is a killer C.S. Lewis reading. It's going to be an awesome night, and please don't forget you're going to want to jump with us over to the Zoom as soon as we get done. Here we go, you guys. Pete Rollins, 2020. Let's check it out.
We live in a world of profound discontent. We see it with the rise of anti-anxiety and mood-enhancing drugs. We see it with the rise of protests and riots across the world, in the increasingly antagonistic political divisions that we witness daily, in the inflaming of culture wars, in financial insecurity, lack of social mobility, and alienation and discontent in the workplace and in family life. In the midst of all of this, there are prophets who promise to help us escape the discontent, to be able to get rid of the dis-ease that we feel, to somehow escape from this anxiety in our bodies and in our social world. Now, anxiety simply means the dizziness of our potentiality. Anxiety is the sense in which you don't know who you are, who you should be, what you should be doing. It's a type of sense in which your life is derailed in some kind of way. And so we're so susceptible to anybody who can promise a way of fleeing this experience. When it comes to truth, some people will say that they have it, right? If you only follow what they're saying, you can experience the truth for yourself and get rid of the anxiety. While others will say you will never have access to the truth, so stop seeking it. That is the path to getting rid of your anxiety. When it comes to desire, some people will say that you can have what will make you whole and complete, while others say it's that very pursuit that makes you incomplete and that actually you need to escape the circle of desire itself. And in terms of meaning, there are some who will say that you can find something which you will live and die for, and others say that it's actually this very pursuit of meaning that makes our lives feel meaningless and that we have to give up that pursuit entirely. There are religions of hedonism that basically promise that we can find the completeness and wholeness that we desire. And there are religions of nihilism that say that this very pursuit is what causes all of the problems. Now, in contrast to these two positions, I want to explore a third, what Søren Kierkegaard would have called a faith in the absurd. Now, in contrast to the religions of hedonism and the religions of nihilism, faith in the absurd is not a fleeing from anxiety, but rather an embrace of it. It is not a running away from that experience, but a joyful embrace of it. It is a way of mobilizing it for the good. And so over the 3 videos, we're going to look at what that might mean. In the first video, I'm going to take C.S. Lewis and explore this notion of truth through a short story he wrote called Light. Then I'm going to look at Simone Weil and how she reflects on the theme of desire. And finally, we'll look at Dietrich Bonhoeffer and what he has to say about the realm of meaning itself. In some respects, you might want to call this a series of reflections on the quantum indeterminacy of life. Or we might want to call it faith and the joyful art of not getting what you want. I want to read to you the story called Light by C.S. Lewis. "Bless us," said Anne. "There's 11 o'clock and you're nearly asleep, Robin." She rose with a bustle of familiar noises, bundling her spools and her little cardboard boxes into the work basket. "Come on, lazy bones," she added. "You want to be nice and fresh for your first walk tomorrow." "That reminds me," said Robin, and then stopped. He approached the subject 3 times already since his operation, once to the doctor, once to the nurse, and once to Anne herself. And each time something seemed to have gone wrong. Now he felt unreasonably nervous. I suppose," he mumbled, "I suppose there'll be lots of light out there when we go for that walk." "You mean it'll be lighter out of doors?" "Well, yes, of course it will, but I must say that I've always thought this is a very light house. This room now, for instance, we've had the sun on it all afternoon." "The sun makes it hot," said Robin tentatively. "What are you talking about?" said Anne. And that's what Robin couldn't understand. Why they all sounded so angry or frightened or bemused whenever he got near to the real question, as if they thought he was mad. "I mean," he said, Look here, dear. I've been wanting to ask you something ever since I got back from the nursing home. I expect it'll sound silly to you, but things must be different to a chap who's been blind all his life, mustn't they? It's all so new to me. As soon as I heard that there was a chance of me getting my sight, well, I looked forward to it. The last thing I thought of before the operation was light, wondering what it would be like. Then all those days afterwards, before they took the bandages off, wondering, waiting. But of course, darling, that's all very natural. Then, his voice shook a little. Why don't I mean, where is the light? His 3 weeks of sight had not yet taught him to read the expression of her face, but he knew by her voice the warm wave of muddled, frightened affection that had swelled up in her as she said, why don't we just go to bed, dearest? We can talk about all this in the morning. You know you must be very tired. No, he said, I've got to have this out. You've got to tell me, great Scott. Don't you want me to know? Know about what, Robin? Ask me anything you like, but there's nothing to worry about. Your sight is perfectly all right now. You're cured. Well then, answer me this. Is there light in this room at present? Of course there is, Robin. Then where is it? Why, it's all around you. Can you see it? Yes, but really, Robin dear, then why can't I? But Robin, you can. You can see me, can't you? And the mantelpiece and the table. But that's what drives me mad. That's the sort of thing you all say. I want to see light. Are you light? Is the mantelpiece light? Is light only another name for all these other things? Oh, I see what you mean. You're talking about the light. That's it there, hanging from the ceiling with the pink shade. Then why did you tell me that the light was all around us? Darling, I mean, that's what gives the light. The light comes from there. Well, then where is the light itself? You see, you just won't say. Nobody will. You tell me there's the light and here's the light and this is in the light and that's in the light and people get in each other's light. But you won't point out the light itself. If none of you know what light is, just say so. If there's no such thing, if it's all just a fairy tale, then tell me. If the operation was a failure and I still can't see what other people see, just let me know. I can take that. It's this secrecy I can't stand. You're all like conspirators. Well, then Anne began to cry, and Robin apologised and comforted her, and they went to bed. This conversation made him more cautious. Clearly, it was never going to be any use asking about light. Either there was no such thing, or else he was all the time making some appalling mistake. If he was not careful, he'd find himself in the hands of doctors again, psychotherapists as likely as not. When Anne took him out for his walk the next day, he was on his guard. He kept on saying, oh, it's beautiful, it's all so lovely, let me drink it in. And that satisfied her. And he knew enough now to know that none of the things he saw could possibly be light. They were, as Anne explained to him, only fields or cows or grass or the sun or trees or a quarry. Nothing could be attempted until he was able to go for walks on his own. About 6 weeks went by before he first did so. During that time, he had passed through every fluctuation of hope and despair. But the steady trend of his feelings was towards an increasing and presently tormenting desire. He no longer concealed from himself the fact that the visible world was basically a disappointment. He realised that he had never really wanted it except for the sake of light. And unless somewhere amongst everything he could find pure stream of light and bathe his eyes in it and drink it in, well, all the clouds and the colours and the animals and what Anne called the view were of just no account. On the morning when he first went out alone, there was a mist. But he had met mist before, and this didn't trouble him. He walked out over the railway bridge and up the steep hill and then along the field path that skirted the lip of the quarry. Anne had taken him there a few days before to show him the view. She had said, "What a lovely sight there is on the hills over there." This was the clue that he was now following, though with very faint hope. He was almost certain by now that she knew no more about light than he did. He was beginning to suspect that most of the unblind were in the same position. What one heard among them was probably mere parrot-like repetition of a rumour concerning something which the very few, the great poets and prophets, had really seen and known. Somewhere it must exist. Perhaps not in England. Perhaps only rare deposits of it existed, far away to the east, in deserts or high mountains. In that case, he would never see it. But if he did, yes, if he did, he would dive into its very heart, give all himself away to it, drink, 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 drink it till he died drinking. The mist thinned rapidly, trees brightened out of it, birds began singing, and he found he was hot. His shadow lay before him, each moment blacker and more distinct. That violent yellow thing, the sun, which one could never see properly, stared at him on his left hand. He pulled the brim of his hat lower over his eyes, blinking. "If only I could see any light," he muttered. At that moment, he caught the sight of a young man who was standing with his legs wide apart on the edge of the cliff, singing and making jabs with some slender instrument at a complicated two-legged object about the same height as himself. If Robin had had more experience, he would have recognised this as a canvas on an easel. As it was, his eyes and those of the wild stranger met so unexpectedly that Robin blurted out, "What are you doing?" before he had time to be self-conscious. "Doing?" said the stranger with a certain light-hearted savagery. "Doing? I'm trying to catch light, if you want to know." "Good God, so am I," said Robin. "Oh, you know too, do you?" said the man. Then, almost vindictively, "They're all fools, you know. How many of them come out to paint on a day like this? How many will see it even if you show it to them? And yet this is the only sort of day when you can see light. I mean solid light. Light you could drink in a cup or swim in. Look at it." He pointed into the quarry. The fog was at death grips with the sun, but not a stone on the quarry floor was yet visible. The bath of vapour shone like white metal and unfolded itself in ever-widening spirals towards them. "Do you see that?" shouted the violent stranger. "There's light for you if you like it." A second later, the expression on the painter's face changed. "Here," he cried, "are you mad?" The grab he made at Robin was just too late. Already he was alone again on the path. From a new-made and rapidly vanishing rift in the fog beneath him, there came up no cry, but only a sound so sharp and so definite that you would hardly expect it to have been made by the fall of anything so soft as a human body. That and the momentary rattling of a dislodged stone.
Wish upon you peace, wish upon you grace, wish for less of what you want and more of what you need. I wish upon you in old life with a heart that stays young. Most of all, I wish upon you love. I wish upon you truth, and all you feel is doubt. I hope you know that an open mind still knows when to shut things out. I wish upon you a brave heart that'll always rise above. Most of all, I wish upon you love. Says the sun, says wish upon you hard times. I hope you know that both joy and pain each need a moment to shine. I wish you ears that are quick to listen, slow to use that tongue. But most of all, I wish upon you love. As the sun sets, when the moon begins to rise, so even in the darkness you'll find the light. You'll find the light. You'll find the light. You'll find the light. Yes, even in the darkness, you'll find the light.
Awesome, thanks, Fred. Hopefully you guys loved that first story. Pete reading Light by C.S. Lewis. He's going to talk about that more in just a second. I love the comment. Thank you, Grace. She said about the intro, the 3-minute intro. She said, that makes me anxious. Haha. So Grace is new to Collective. What she doesn't know is that Pete very often says, he'll give a talk and people go, oh man, you're just trying to make us depressed. And he says, no. I'm not trying to make you depressed. I'm trying to tell you that you already are. I think the same could be said for this series, Anxiety and Desire. Who among us is not already anxious? Pete is helping to point it out, to bring it to the surface, and to help us meaningfully reflect. Not so that we're smarter, so that we're right, so that we vote for the right person, but so that we experience wellness, so that we live a good life with the people that we live with. So let's dive in. Thanks again, Pete. Let's take it away with week 1, Anxiety and Desire.
I'd like to begin by giving you a little bit of background to the story that I just read to you by C.S. Lewis. It was originally published in 1977 under the title The Man Born Blind. Now, this was a number of years after C.S. Lewis had died, but actually a friend of Lewis's said that it was likely written in the early 1920s, which would put it as one of the earliest pieces of writing that C.S. Lewis had done. At least one of the earliest short stories that he'd ever written. But then something fascinating happened. 2 decades after C.S. Lewis had died, in the mid-1980s, a new manuscript appeared out of nowhere. It lands in a London bookseller, and it's called Light. And this manuscript, Light, is a revised version of The Man Born Blind. So this manuscript is passed around a few people, and then the C.S. Lewis scholars get their hands on it. And for a while it was debated whether this was a story of Lewis's or whether it was a forgery. But broadly speaking, it's agreed that this actually was a revised version of the story by C.S. Lewis that was done much later. So some people call it the last short story of C.S. Lewis. So we have this interesting dichotomy which is connected to the story itself, between this being the first short story that C.S. Lewis ever wrote and the last short story that C.S. Lewis ever wrote. And the one that I read to you is the revised manuscript. Now, what's interesting about the story is it captures something that's central to the work of C.S. Lewis right from the 1920s until he died. And it's something that can be articulated in his writings about the difference between enjoyment and contemplation. So in his book Surprised by Joy, he talks about how he read this book by the philosopher Samuel Alexander in 1924. It's a book called Space, Time and Deity. He read this book, and in the book he saw this distinction between enjoyment and contemplation, and he said that he immediately understood the importance of these concepts. And he took these concepts and he made them his own. He changed them a little bit from the original. And basically, enjoyment is the name he gives to the experience of something. So when you hear this distinction, it's not about something pleasurable. necessarily. It's just something that you're feeling. It can be painful. You enjoy love, but love can bring suffering. You enjoy the experience of eating, but this notion of enjoyment even expands out to eating something that you dislike terribly. Even to be tortured or to break your arm is a form of enjoyment in the sense that C.S. Lewis means it, the technical sense of a bodily existential experience. And then there's contemplation. And contemplation is where you're able to think about and reflect on something. So you might write about love, or you might experience love. So you might contemplate love, you might enjoy love. And one of the things that C.S. Lewis explored is how never the twain shall meet. These are two incommensurable worlds. The more you're in enjoyment, the less you're in contemplation, and vice versa. And you can contemplate something that you're enjoying, but it's not exactly the same. When you're contemplating it, you're stepping outside of it. You're looking at it from a distance. You're reflecting on it. And when you're in it, you can't do that because you're immersed within it. You're immanent to it. You're saturated by the phenomenon. So enjoyment and contemplation. This causes a problem because we would like to be able to bring the two of these together. And for C.S. Lewis, the answer to this was in myth. Myth is a type of writing that isn't quite fiction and it isn't quite non-fiction. It's something else. It's a type of writing that allows you to experience something while also satisfying some intellectual dimension of yourself. The mind and the soul have some sort of satisfaction or nourishment in a good myth. So in this story, we see three characters. There's Anne, there's Robin, and there's the painter. Now this is an allegory. So think of light as a type of metaphysical substance. The light is a representation of truth, of the absolute, of beauty, of the ethical foundations of the world, of basically the ground of being, God. Right? That's what the light is. And you have on one hand Anne, who could be seen as a type of scientistic thinker, a type of thinker who just sees the world as it is, and who doesn't understand why Robin is trying to seek light. She doesn't even understand what the question is. In one way, she's in pure enjoyment. She's in enjoyment in the sense that she's immersed in the world, she's interacting with the world, but there's no dimension of this world that is strange to her, that is uncanny, that causes her to reflect on its ground. And then on the other side, you have this wild painter. And the painter can be seen as a representation of someone who's superstitious. On one side, you've got the scientistic, kind of looking at the world as just, it is what it is. There is no grounding force. That question doesn't even kind of make sense. You're simply in the world. It's the world of the ordinary. And then the painter is in the world of the occult, right? And by the way, C.S. Lewis is probably thinking about his friend Owen Barfield when he's writing this, because Barfield was an anthroposophist, a type of occultist who believed in being able to kind of see behind the veil of illusion and see ultimate reality. And that's what the painter is. The painter is the one who's saying, I know the truth, I know what beauty is, I know what the absolute is. Right? So you've got these two characters, and then you have Robin. Now Robin is dissatisfied. Robin is a searcher. Robin has the sense that there is something called light. There is some sort of truth. There is beauty. There is an ultimate ground. And he's looking for it everywhere. And the first relationship that you have in the story is between Anne and Robin. And Anne cannot understand this search. She is, as I say, in pure enjoyment, in the sense of just pure immersion in the world. But Robin feels in the world but not of it. Robin feels an uncanny relationship to the world and is looking for something that is kind of deeper than what can be seen, something that grounds what is perceivable. And his relationship with Anne just makes him all the more dissatisfied, all the more frustrated. And he's looking, in fact, symbolically, he goes on this walk, which means he goes on this searching journey to find light. And he starts to think that maybe it doesn't exist, or it exists in some faraway country, and only a few people have ever seen it. And then he comes across the painter. Now, in many ways, of course, Anne and the painter are paradigmatic opposites. But the frustration of his relationship with Anne is pushing him all the more towards what will happen when he meets the painter. Because when he meets the painter, he meets someone who is a type of preacher of the truth, who says, I know what the absolute is. I know what light looks like. I can give it to you. I can present it on this canvas for you. Now, in truth, the painter could be just speaking with hyperbole. But Robin takes this very seriously. And Robin then walks into the light in order to drink it in order to swoon within it. And as a result, he walks off the side of the quarry, falls to his death. Now, this is interesting because you wouldn't expect this from Lewis. The idea that actually the worst of the two positions is the person who thinks they know the truth. They are the more dangerous one. This is a type of psychological or psychotic certainty, right? The person who is tyrannized by the truth. And this searcher who then finds this community or finds this individual who says they have the truth doesn't lead to life, but leads to a type of death. And that's the pure contemplation, right? Because for C.S. Lewis, the deepest truth is not a truth that can be grasped as an object of contemplation. If you do that, you will end up with nothing. You won't end up with something, you'll end up with vapor in your hands, and you'll end up in a type of psychic death. But C.S. Lewis also is critiquing Anne and the idea that we can just be in the world and not ask these deeper questions, not be searchers, not look for some sort of deeper truth than the one that we merely kind of see in our everyday lives. So to understand how we can kind of bring these two together, I want to turn to the work of Paul Tillich. Now, what's important here when you read this story is to realize that really what Robin wants to do is get rid of anxiety. He wants to get rid of his dissatisfaction. He would love to be like Anne. And I think it's hinted at even in the story. He'd love to be able to shut off this question and just live in the world. And then ultimately he's drawn and seduced by the one who can get rid of the anxiety and dissatisfaction by giving the answer. So this entire story is about Robin trying to overcome this anxiety of not knowing what the truth is, not knowing where he fits within this, not being able to shut the question down, and ultimately falling for someone who says they can give the answer. Now, the story doesn't end with how Robin really should have done things. But if we look at the work of Paul Tillich, we might get a hint of what C.S. Lewis is trying to explore here. In 1967, a book called My Search for Absolutes was published. It was Paul Tillich's last book. It was a series of lectures he gave in Chicago, and it was published posthumously. And in this book, he talks about his search for absolutes, his search for the truth. Just like Robin in the story, it's a story where he's telling these students of his philosophical endeavor to grasp the metaphysical reality. And it's a beautiful book. I would really recommend you read it. It's a very short book, and it's got these really interesting illustrations from a very famous American cartoonist at the time. But in this story, basically in this book, basically Tillich argues that the search for truth is the evidence of having found the truth. So he talks about in philosophy, for example, whenever you argue about truth, if you argue whether truth exists or not, right, you find someone who says they don't believe in truth, and maybe you start arguing because you do believe in truth, and the two of you have this argument. Tillich would say that both of you are presupposing truth. You don't argue to truth, you argue from it. As soon as you engage in the argument, you are both presupposing something deeper, because you're agreeing that there's a way to solve this. You're agreeing that you can understand each other, that you can move towards an answer. And so although you can have a theory of truth, even to have a theory of truth is already to be immersed within the truth. And then he uses the example of beauty. He talks about how an artist will want to capture the very essence of the beautiful. And every time they try to do it, well, they fail, they miss in some sort of way. And so artists will often go back to the same painting, the same landscape, just like Monet, who painted around 250 different canvases of the same pond. But it's not simply that they cannot grasp beauty. They are already grasped by beauty. The very pursuit is the evidence that beauty is there. So although they're always failing to grasp it, that failure is something that is satisfying, that is productive. Just like for the philosopher, the very pursuit of truth is the very thing that brings satisfaction and brings productivity. And finally, as well, he uses the example of someone who's in law, who's trying to articulate justice. And again, he says that every time you try to articulate what justice is, you miss it. You write down laws, and laws can be just, but they're never completely just. That's why you can always rechange them and adapt them to new situations, because the law never fully captures justice. But the very pursuit of justice shows that that person is already standing within it. So the idea is that the dissatisfaction of not having is the satisfaction of having. This is actually captured in the verse in Matthew 7:7 that says, "Ask and you will receive, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be opened." The actual literal translation is slightly different from the way we hear it. So when we read this verse, it seems like there's a time delay, right? Ask and you will receive, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be opened. So for example, if I lose something and I look for it, eventually I'll find it, and there's a time gap where if I knock on the door, I have to wait and then the door is opened. But in the original, it would be better to say ask is receiving, seeking is finding, knocking is the door opening, right? It's not cause and effect, it's more dialectic, like heat and light. They are happening together. This actually connects with something in the work of Albert Camus. Camus talked about the conservative and the revolutionary. And he talked about the conservative as someone who looks back to maybe a golden age in the past and who works towards returning to that golden age. And they're dissatisfied by their work, by having to do that. But they fantasize that if they finally got to that point, then they would be happy. In contrast, you have the revolutionary, and the revolutionary looks forward to a utopia. And they're dissatisfied until they get to that utopic end. And they fantasize that if they could get there, everything would be wonderful. And part of the problem, of course, is one, you're dissatisfied because you haven't got to your golden age or your utopia. And then secondly, if you ever do create that golden age or that utopia, it's not going to be what you expect, right? That's always disappointment at the point that you get it. And so Camus brings up a third character, and it's the character of the rebel. And the rebel is someone who enjoys their dissatisfaction, who has an idea of a better world, but they enjoy the struggle for it. In the very fight for that, they find meaning and truth and beauty and a moral way of being. The perfect example of the rebel is Marlon Brando in the movie On the Waterfront, where he's part of a gang called the Black Rebel Motorcycle Club. And he's playing a character called Johnny who's in this cafe. And this woman says to Johnny, "What are you rebelling against?" And Johnny just looks at her and he's tapping on this table and he says, "What do you got?" Right? You've got this image of that rebel who's enjoying the very act of struggle itself. And this is a way of thinking about the kingdom of God, that it's not in front of you, it's not behind you, it's within you, in the very act of love, in the very work of bringing the kingdom of God into the world. The kingdom of God is in the world. The act of working towards it is the evidence of its being. The mystics would say that the act of trying to grasp the truth shows that you're grasped by the truth. The very attempt to name the truth shows that you are already named by the truth. Now for Tillich, there's a problem on either side of this. We have the tendency to either go towards a one-dimensional, empty type of life, like the life of Anne in the story, where we don't feel the uncanniness of the world, we don't feel this sense of beauty and of ethics and of truth that cannot be grasped but is always grasping us, that is always moving us, right? So we lose all sense of that. We close it down. Now it's always there as a whisper, but we basically shut ourselves off from it as much as we can and just move on with our everyday lives, right? And that's what Tillich talks about as a type of emptiness. Or he talks about the demonic. And the demonic is where you experience this feeling of beauty, of ethics, and of truth, but you create a type of discourse in a community that thinks that you have it, that you can name it, that you can put it in a bottle. And this is demonic because it leads to this sense of what's called in theology idolatry, where you think you have the truth. And when you think you have the truth, then you can use that as a weapon to destroy everybody else. And for Tillich, interestingly, like Lewis, there is this certain sense in which the life of faith is about keeping that space open. That the language of faith is a language of having and not having, of struggle and searching that is simultaneously finding and being. That there is a certain dissatisfaction that is itself also satisfaction. And actually, C.S. Lewis called this joy. Joy is a type of pleasure that we get from not having. It's a type of enjoyment in the struggle of life itself. And there's something about having a desert in the oasis of our lives, a place where we can go that can help us experience this sense of being immersed in a truth and a beauty and an ethics that we cannot grasp. There's something about that we need today, we need yesterday, and we need tomorrow. And there's something about this that both Tillich and Lewis would call the life of faith.
Oh man, so it may be that you don't know what to do with the feelings you're having based on his accent alone. It may also be that you didn't activate your brain for the kind of heavy lifting that we were going to do this evening, and you feel like a science project in middle school where the volcanoes exploded and the lava's just coming down. We are going to get into all this stuff, so much good stuff. Thank you, Pete, a ton. We're going to reflect on Pete's ideas and challenging perspective. And as we prepare for great conversation, we want to pause for a moment and remind ourselves that this collective, this group of people, when we get together in this way, that this is for us a school of love. And to Pete's point, that can't just be an esoteric religious idea. We believe that a school of love has to be made of bodies and of blood. And by that we mean it's made of real life in the real world, and not just integrated and well bodies, but broken bodies and blood poured out. That's sacred. That's where God is. And to Pete's point, there's this odd sense in which in the brokenness, in being broken and poured out, we are also somehow simultaneously resurrected and bound to one another in sort of the membership of a human body. So thank you guys again for participating tonight. You are a part of this body. By participating, you are a part of this school of love. Your presence does make us who we are. We're not gathering as we might otherwise, but we are gathering. If you've got elements, you can feel free to receive those. Enjoy the real presence of this gathering of our friendship. We're going to sing a little bit, and then we'll jump over to the Zoom in just a minute. Let's do it. Go for it. I've been trying to call, and I've been on my own for long enough. Maybe you can show me how to love. Maybe I'm going through withdrawal. You don't even have to do too much. You can turn me on with just one touch, baby. Look around and see the city's cold and empty. No one around to judge me. I can't see clearly when you're gone. I said, ooh, I'm blinded by the light, and I can't sleep until I feel your touch. I said, ooh, I'm drowning in the night. When I'm like this, you're the one I trust. I'm running out of time, 'cause I can see the sun light up the sky. So I hit the road and overdrive, baby. Oh, the city's cold and empty. No one's around to judge me. I can't see clearly when you're gone. I said, ooh, I'm blinded by the lights. I can't sleep until I feel your touch. I said, ooh, I'm drowning in the night. When I'm like this, I can't know the one I trust. I said, ooh, I'm blinded by the light. I can't sleep until I feel your touch. I said, ooh, I'm drowning in the night. When I'm like this, you're the one I trust. All right, thank you guys so much. Sign up for the weekly. Check all that out at wearecollectivechurch.com. You already know where to find us on Facebook. Sign up for the YouTube at youtube.com/wearecollectivechurch. Jump on and get on the email. We're going to just jump in a second to our closing ritual, but for the benediction, let me share these words from our mutual friend, actually introduced to Padraig through Pete. These are the words of Padraig Otsuma from his poem Traveling Light. He says, because sometimes we travel heavy. In those heady times, we can barely imagine the free body movement of dance. Because sometimes we travel dark, and from those hard paths, we can't even see. Can't even conjure an image of sunrise or moonrise or starlight or fire. Because sometimes we travel solo. In those lonely times, we forget all the others we've traveled with, lovingly traveled home. Because sometimes we need to be traveling lightly. Because sometimes we're in need of regular reminding that light comes in circles and waves and small moments, and light comes to find us, and light comes with hope. Grace and peace, if you'd bring your hands together as a symbol of our intention, first to our forehead for clarity of thoughts, next to our lips for clarity of speech, and to our hearts for clarity of action. So then all that we say and do, love would be our first thought, our first word, and our first deed. Grace and peace. Thank you guys again so much for coming on. Actually, if you want to stay on for just a moment on the Facebook, we're going to go ahead and kill the live feed, but we will get the Zoom up. If you signed up in advance, you should have just received an email from me personally with a link to the Zoom. You can jump on there. We should have plenty of space. So, hey, Sharon, thanks for that. Perfect in the sense of mature, yeah. So we're going to jump over to the Zoom. Pete Rollins is going to be on with us live. He and I are going to chat a little bit. We'll take your guys' questions. We're excited to jump over there. Thanks again for joining us tonight. We'll get that Zoom link up in just a moment, and we'll see you live on Zoom in just a few.